So in this presentation, I'm going to try to convince you can have all of that. So I'm going to start with the second scenario, which is making a hand-drawn map and doing all of the planning and preparation for that project using ArcGIS Pro. So a while back, I had this project. I was making these little maps. They're watercolor of highway interchanges and braided rivers. I liked how tangled they were and how their forms started to look like one another. So they're on watercolor paper with graphite, watercolor paint, totally handmade. However, all of the preparation beforehand was done in Pro. I didn't actually create or look for any vector data for these because when you're going to draw by hand, oftentimes you can just trace directly off of some imagery and bam, you have features. So this is one of the interchanges I wanted to do. It's in Dubai. And Dubai, by the way, has some really elaborate and decorative interchanges. I encourage you to go check them out. So I first want to get an appropriate projection. I'm doing all different parts of the world. I don't know what coordinate systems they're using there, so I'm just going to set up a spatial filter here in my map properties. And I'll set that to the current visible extent. So now when I scroll through to find UTM zone, my list is filtered so I can find the one that's appropriate for this area. Great. I can already head over to my layout. So I've set up this layout already. It's custom size, 5 by 5 inches to match the little pieces of paper I cut out. And I've added the map frame and positioned and sized it just the way I want. Now I just need to activate that map frame so I can go to the area. So I've already made a bookmark for my interchange. There it is. I can zoom and pan to make the composition the way I like. You can use the A and D keys as these little shortcuts for rotating the view. If you need more precision, you just go into map properties again. There's here in the general tab, we've got a rotation property. Gives you a bit more control. Of course, I can fine tune my scale down here. And I think that looks good. So I could start tracing right now, but there's a lot more prep work that I can do that's a lot easier to do in Pro than on paper. For example, I can add a north arrow if I want one of those. I can add a scale bar. And I also wanted to add a grid. Okay, so all of those elements usually take some time to set them up, style them, all the properties just the way you want. The nice thing is once you've done that, you can just right-click on that property, that element, and save to your favorite style. That's great because next time you make a map, you can find that right there in your gallery, ready to go, so you don't have to redo all that work. So I'm just doing some planning, deciding where I want all of my elements to land. You know, it's a lot easier to move things around when they're not in pen. I can figure out where I want to put labels. And last thing I think here is that these service layer credits are going to be kind of distracting when I'm trying to trace. So if I go to dynamic text, I can change those credits into dynamic text and simply move them out of the way. So I'm almost ready to start tracing, but the imagery is kind of dark. It's great to see right now, but once I tape a piece of paper to my computer screen, it's going to be really hard to see. I need to increase the contrast of it. So what I do is I go back over to the map view, go to the share ribbon, and I can export a JPEG of this map, which I've already done, so I'm not going to redo it. But the important thing is to know that you want to check create a world file so it lands in the right place when you do add data and add that JPEG back in. There it is. And colors are going to look a little different, but really not that much of a difference. But if I go to the appearance ribbon here, I can affect these enhancement controls. They're for brightness, contrast, and gamma. So you can play around, get it the way you want. I think that looks a little bit better. All right, now I have this map. It's pretty ugly, but it is all prepped, ready for me to trace. I know what I'm going to be doing. Of course, I can change all of those elements later, but it's really nice to start with a plan when you have a blank piece of paper. So the final thing looked like this. So as I said, this was a series with a whole bunch of different maps. When I'm ready to do the next one in the series, the nice thing is I can reuse a lot of the work I already did. I'm just going to turn off these labels because they're no longer relevant. And let's activate this guy again and just zoom to a different bookmark. All right, so this is the Congo River. And let's change the coordinate system. And I also found that at this scale in this area, a different base map was more appropriate. I'm going to end up with a hand-drawn map that looks similar to the other one, but I'm using different source information because the imagery didn't give me these cultural features that I want. The north arrow, the grid, the scale bar, all of those things were automatically updated for my new area. Obviously, though, scale bar at this scale might need a few changes. So I can do that on the design ribbon right here. So let's make this kilometers. And I also can apply the same trick for increasing the contrast. I've already made that one. There you go. Again, really ugly map, but it's way easier to trace it now. So this one looks like this. So what about going the other way around? Maybe you have, you're making a really polished, finished map in Pro, but there's just one feature or element that you would rather do by hand. So for example, this map here, I have a really stark black and white color scheme going on, and the hillshade is, it's black and white, but it's really just a lot of gray. It doesn't quite conform to my strict color scheme. I think terrain is really important in this map, but I just wish it was available as line work instead. What I did is I made my own line work using a pen and tracing paper and this hillshade layer as my reference. So how you can do that is you just turn off all the other layers in the map. You just have the hillshade and this red rectangle, which is my reference layer that I'll use later on for georeferencing. I just like to use the outline of the layout extent. You can use lots of different things. And similarly to before, playing with the brightness and contrast is going to make a big difference. I could just go trace this, but tracing, like everything else in cartography, is mainly an exercise in deciding what to leave out. So the more I can simplify this image before I start work, way easier my job is going to be. Oops. It's a little better. Scale here is really important. You want to trace your map at least the same scale that you're going to make the finished product in. So this layout is 11 by 17 inches. So I made a piece of tracing paper. It's 11 by 17 inch rectangle drawn onto it. Got a little bit wrinkled in my bag. I actually do recommend doubling the scale. That way you get really nice fine lines. But it also means that your paper has to be twice as big. It becomes kind of unwieldy. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit of extra real estate here. And you want to experiment with the scale until, I think that's the one I wanted, until that red rectangle on your screen is exactly the same size as the red rectangle on your paper. And you just line them up and tape it to your computer monitor, which looks kind of like that. Turns out your computer makes a really excellent light table. And then you trace away, which is harder than it sounds, but we'll each do that a little bit differently. In the end, I got something that looked like this. You want to scan it, and then just add that scanned image back into your map in Pro. So let's do that. And of course, you'll have to georeference it using that red rectangle, but in the interest of time, I've already done that for you. But this part's slow for some reason. There we go. Now, as before, once again, I'm going to adjust the appearance properties, because that image is pretty dark. You're picking up a lot of noise from the scanner. But you can clean that up in Photoshop as well, but a lot of it can just be handled with those simple controls there. Oh, thank you. So why isn't that working? And if we do it right, we end up with something that looks like vector data, even though it's not. Turn everything else on, and what you get is this line work terrain that fits in seamlessly with the rest of my black and white design on this map. What I really like about this is that you can use it in lots of different ways. You can make hachures, you can make fantasy-style mountain ranges, you can do nice rocky outcrops, but best of all, you really can develop your own unique drawing style for terrain, something that maybe the rest of us haven't seen yet. And that's it. Does anyone have questions?
We have time for a few questions. In the front row, Nathaniel Slaughter.
Thanks. This is great, thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the printing process, like what you did after making these on the computer?
The printing process?
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so like for this one, for example, you got your drawing back into the computer and you kind of synthesized everything, and then did you print after that, or was this for online viewing?
No, this is a print map, and it's actually, as I said, 11 by 17 in black and white. So actually, this is going to be in the map gallery, but I forgot to bring it, so I'm headed to the copier at lunch, and conveniently it's black and white and 11 by 17, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem.
Any other questions in the audience? Okay, I do not see any hands. So thank you, Heather. That was really, really neat.